They're not gone. Not really. They're just quiet. Still. Watching. You think it's over. But it isn't. They haven't moved on. They're calculating, waiting, and testing. Because before they come back, they need to know something. Something only you can reveal. Are you still open? Still waiting? Still emotionally available? Even after the silence? They act indifferent. But behind that calm exterior, they're running silent experiments. In the background of your life, they want to know if you'll still chase them, if you'll still react, if you'll still feel something. When they appear again, they're not testing you to be cruel. They're testing you because they're terrified of being rejected, of losing control, of admitting how much they still care. So instead of reaching out, they test the waters. They study your silence before they risk breaking theirs. Part 1. The unseen game begins. It starts subtly, almost unnoticeable, a like on a photo they'd normally ignore, a story view after weeks of disappearance, a casual comment that feels a little too intentional. That's not coincidence. That's a test. They're sending emotional signals while pretending they don't mean anything. They want to see how you'll react, if you'll respond, if you'll lean forward again. Because if you do, they'll know you're still emotionally accessible. And that gives them power, not malicious power, just emotional safety. They need proof that you're still there before they risk showing up again. You might think they've moved on, but in truth, they're observing you from a distance, collecting data in silence. They watch what you post, who you're with, whether your tone has changed. They read between every digital line, not because they're over you, but because they can't stop measuring whether it's safe to come back. This isn't logic. It's fear disguised as control. They lost something that mattered, and now they don't trust themselves or you enough to simply say what they feel. So instead, they test the edges of your energy. They want to know, do you still react to them? Do you still care what they think? Would you still let them in if they knocked again? Every subtle move they make isn't random. It's emotional reconnaissance, a breadcrumb trail, a digital whisper, a what if. You think they've forgotten you, but they're still carrying your name like a password, something they test occasionally to see if it still unlocks your attention. And here's the hardest part. They don't even realize they're doing it. It's instinct, a subconscious pull, a survival pattern that runs deeper than intention. People test others when they're scared of being vulnerable again, when they want to feel wanted, without risking rejection. So they'll push and pull, disappear and reappear, act detached while craving closeness. It's not a game. It's a defense mechanism. The mind's way of saying, I need proof I'm safe before I try again. They'll check your reaction in small ways. A nostalgic song they know you'll see on their story. A mutual friend casually mentioning your name. A message sent by mistake. Each one is a controlled spark, just enough to test the connection, but not enough to expose their heart. If you respond, they get their reassurance. If you don't, they tell themselves it's closure. Either way, it gives them a sense of control in a situation that once made them feel powerless. You see, heartbreak isn't just about loss. It's about ego, safety, self-perception. When someone leaves, they often expect to feel relief. But when silence hits, the mind starts to wonder, do I still matter? Would they still care if I reached out? And that question becomes the beginning of their secret tests. They don't test you because they stopped loving you. They test you because they still do. And they hate that it still has power over them. They want to know if you'd still open that door, if your heart still holds space for them, if time has softened or hardened your love. They tell themselves they just want to check in. But what they're really checking is your emotional temperature. Are you warm? Or have you gone cold? Sometimes The test is silence itself. They'll wait, not days, but weeks, months. They'll wonder if you'll break the distance, if you'll reach out first. And every day you don't, a part of them panics, while another part clings to pride. That's their inner war, the part that wants to come back, and the part that's terrified to. So they watch, and test, and wait for a sign that it's safe. When you post something meaningful, they'll overanalyze it. Every lyric, every caption, every piece of subtext. If they sense it's about them, their pulse quickens. They won't admit it, but they'll feel seen. And if it's not about them, they'll tell themselves you've moved on. But it'll sting, because deep down, they were hoping it still was. You might think they don't care, but in truth, they're haunted by curiosity. Every test they create is really a mirror, reflecting their own confusion back at them. They want closure, but they also want possibility. They want to forget, but they also want to know. They're not forgotten. They live in that contradiction, a space between distance and desire. And that's why they test. They test your patience, to see if you'll still hold space. They test your boundaries, to see if they can still cross them. They test your silence, to see if it hurts you, the way there's hurt them. It's not cruelty, it's fear in disguise. The fear of being the only one who still feels. The fear of returning to a door that no longer opens. They're not testing your love. They're testing their own courage. And the truth is, you'll recognize the moment their tests begin. It'll feel like déjà vu, a familiar rhythm returning in small ways. They'll start showing up in places you didn't expect. Their name will start reappearing in subtle patterns. Mutuals will mention them again, randomly. That's how you'll know. They're circling back, not fully, but cautiously, because before they come back, they have to convince themselves that it's safe to be seen again. And when that happens, your reaction becomes everything, because your response will decide whether this cycle restarts or finally ends. How you hold your silence, how you carry your peace, how you don't chase the breadcrumb trail. That's what reveals the truth. Not about them, but about you. They test because they're afraid of rejection, but you'll learn that you don't need to pass their tests to prove your worth. You've already done enough, loved enough, waited enough. And when they realize that your peace no longer depends on their presence, that's when the real test flips. They thought they were testing you, but really, you were revealing them. They don't call it testing. They call it checking in, seeing how you've been. Just curious. But that's not curiosity. That's anxiety wearing polite clothes. Because when someone walks away, they expect their absence to teach them peace. And sometimes it does, for a while. But when the quiet stretches too long, it stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like loss. So they reach for you, not with a hand, but with a signal, a breadcrumb, a flicker, something small enough to deny, but heavy enough to carry meaning. That's how you know the test has begun. They'll tell themselves they're over you, but still, they'll watch. Still, they'll listen for your name. Because moving on isn't clean. It's messy. It's full of contradictions. Part of them misses you. Part of them resents you. Part of them wonders if you still miss them back. And those parts, they fight inside of them. The result of that fight? Confusion, mixed signals, emotional testing. It's not always calculated. Sometimes it's reflexive, a survival response that says, I want to reach out, but I can't afford to lose face again. So they don't ask directly. They test indirectly. They'll wait to see if you'll notice their silence. They'll measure how long it takes before you reach out. They'll post something vague, hoping you'll decode it. They want your reaction because your reaction proves that they still matter. That's the real addiction. Not you, but what you represent. validation, control, safety. When someone loses control and love, their nervous system remembers the fall. It remembers the panic, the unpredictability, the way rejection felt like danger. So when they test you, they're really testing for safety. They're trying to predict if this time will hurt the same, if this time they'll be seen differently. And that's why the tests feel both personal and distant, because they're not trying to reconnect yet. They're trying to regulate. They'll act like they don't care, but every move is a measurement. If you reply too quickly, they'll pull back. If you don't reply at all, they'll spiral. If you stay calm and neutral, they'll get curious again. Because to them, emotional balance looks like mystery, and mystery feels like safety. They crave reassurance, but they fear dependency. So they hover, close enough to feel your warmth, far enough to avoid your fire. You have to understand something important here. When people test love, it's rarely about manipulation. It's about attachment wounds. Maybe in their past, love felt inconsistent. Maybe they learned that closeness always came with a cost. So now, they test before trusting. They push to see if you'll stay. They pull back to see if you'll chase. They don't realize that in doing so, they're repeating the very pattern that made them feel unloved in the first place. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves. Because admitting they still care means admitting they were wrong. Admitting they miss you means admitting they made a mistake. And ego doesn't handle mistakes well. So instead of vulnerability, they choose strategy. Instead of reaching out, they watch from afar. It's easier to test your heart than to confess theirs. Sometimes the test comes disguised as detachment. They'll pretend they're fine, post about being at peace, act unbothered. But that's not peace. That's performance. They want to see if that performance stirs something in you, if you'll comment, if you'll reach out, if you'll react, because your reaction would mean the bond is still alive. And that means hope. Other times, they'll mirror your energy. If you're cold, they'll get colder. If you're kind, they'll soften too. It's emotional mimicry, a subconscious dance of defense and desire. They think they're testing you, but what they're really testing is their own emotional capacity. Can they feel safe again? Can they risk being vulnerable? Can they survive the answer if you're no longer waiting? And here's what they don't expect. Your silence becomes their mirror. At first, they'll think you're just playing along. But after a while, they'll feel the weight of your absence. They'll start wondering, did they stop caring? Did I wait too long? Did my test push them away for good? And that's when realization hits. The test became the teacher, because in trying to measure your love, they ended up revealing their fear. You don't have to chase. You don't have to decode every post, every silence, every small breadcrumb, because the truth is, the ones who test love are usually the ones most afraid to lose it. They're not testing your patience. They're testing their own readiness. They're not seeing if you're still loyal. They're seeing if they're still capable of love. And that's a test you can't take for them. So when they circle back again, and they will, remember this. You've already passed. Not because you responded right, but because you didn't lose yourself trying to prove your worth. You stayed grounded. You chose peace. You didn't take the bait of their emotional uncertainty. And that's what breaks the cycle. Because when you stop reacting to tests, you start communicating in truth. You say, without words, I'm not here to prove I care. I'm here to connect, genuinely or not at all. And that energy changes everything. They feel it. They sense it. They start realizing that the old tactics no longer work. That if they want to come back, they'll have to do it differently. This is the turning point. The moment their tests stop giving them control and start giving them clarity. They realize that testing you only delays what they actually want: connection, honesty, peace. And if they've grown enough to face that truth, that's when they'll finally show up. Not with questions, but with presence. Not with strategy, but with sincerity. So let them test. Let them wonder. Let them try to decode your silence. Because while they're running emotional experiments, you're doing something far more powerful. You're healing. You're outgrowing the need to be chosen by someone who needs to test you first. You're not waiting to be approved. You're waiting to be met. And that difference is everything. They think they're measuring your love, but you're really showing them what self-respect looks like. You're showing them that love isn't about performing patience or proving devotion. It's about alignment, energy, timing. They'll feel that shift. They always do. And when they do, the testing ends. The real choice begins. They thought they were in control. That by staying silent, by testing your reactions, they could keep the upper hand. They thought distance would give them power, that you'd wait, that you'd wonder, that you'd eventually break. But something unexpected happened. You didn't. You stopped chasing the ghost of what was. You stopped decoding every action. You stopped waiting for proof of love from someone too afraid to give it openly. And that's when everything shifted. At first, they didn't notice. They thought you were just playing along, matching their energy. But over time, the silence started to sound different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was peaceful. It wasn't a standoff. It was acceptance. And they felt it. That quiet confidence. That absence of need. That strange calm that says, I'm not waiting for you anymore. That's when their tests stopped working. They'd drop a hint. You wouldn't bite. They'd like your story. You'd leave it unread. They'd reach out with a vague message. You'd reply kindly, but not emotionally. No spark. No chase. No validation. You weren't angry. You weren't bitter. You were just done. And that scared them more than any silence ever could. Because now, they could feel the imbalance flip. For so long, they were the ones with emotional leverage. The ones deciding when to talk, when to vanish, when to test. But suddenly, you weren't playing anymore. You'd stopped participating in the game. And without your energy, their control lost its fuel. They didn't realize how much power your attention carried until it disappeared. That's when the panic started creeping in. Not loud, quiet, subtle, like a background hum that never fades. They'd check your profile more than they'd admit. Scroll too far back into your posts. Read captions twice. Notice the new glow, the new calm. You weren't posting for them anymore. You were living for yourself. And that shift, it stung. Because now, every test they created was revealing a truth they didn't want to face. They were the ones who still cared. See, when someone loses emotional control, their first instinct is to reclaim it through strategy. But when strategy fails, they're left with what they've been avoiding all along: their own feelings. And that's where they are now, sitting in the quiet they once thought they wanted, realizing the silence doesn't give peace. It gives perspective. They start remembering the softness in your voice, the warmth in your laugh, the way you made them feel seen without trying. They remember what they pushed away, and now they miss it in ways they can't admit. They told themselves they were just checking, but those small check-ins became emotional relapses. They'd scroll through your memories like confession, every post a reminder, every silence a punishment they accidentally built. And slowly, they start seeing it clearly. They didn't test you to see if you'd stay. They tested you to protect themselves. But in doing so, they taught you how to live without them. And that's a lesson they can't undo. Now, they replay everything. The last words, the unfinished moments, the messages they didn't send, the ones they typed, deleted, and regretted not saying. They realized that by holding back, they didn't preserve their pride. They sabotaged their peace. They see now that silence doesn't heal, it hollows. And every time they chose distance over honesty, a piece of what you shared eroded, until there was nothing left to test. This is where heartbreak starts to grow in them. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that lingers, the kind that sneaks in at night and whispers what they lost. They'll see you living differently now, grounded, clear, whole, and it'll hit them. You healed while they hid. You faced the ache head on. They buried it under pride and performance. And now, that buried ache has become their ghost. They'll try to convince themselves they're fine. They'll go on dates, talk to new people, pretend it's all behind them. But it won't feel the same. Because now, every connection feels shallow compared to what you brought out in them. You weren't just another person. You were a mirror, showing them who they could be if they stopped running from love. And now that you're gone, they miss that reflection, not because they can't replace you, but because they can't replace the version of themselves they were when you were around. It's ironic, isn't it? They tested your love to feel safe, but in the end, your silence became the test. They couldn't pass. You didn't block them. You didn't argue. You didn't beg. You just let time speak. And time told the truth. You were the constant. They were the variable. And that realization shook something in them. They'll start to wonder if they can fix it, if it's too late, if you'd even want to hear from them now. But what they don't realize yet is that the version of you they're missing doesn't exist anymore. That version of you lived in their tests, in their half-efforts, in their uncertainty. The you that exists now lives in peace, not in waiting, in strength, not in proving. And that truth is what breaks them. Because now, they're the one left wondering. They're the one who can't read the signs. They're the one trying to decode silence. That no longer speaks for them. They'll think about reaching out 100 times. They'll write the message, delete it, rewrite it, overthink it. They'll hover over send and feel their heart race. Because this time, they don't have the upper hand. They're not testing anymore. They're hoping. And that's the moment they finally understand what it felt like to be you. You were never the one who lost power. You were just the first to wake up. You stopped performing for someone who couldn't see your worth. You stopped fighting for someone who only showed up when it was convenient. You stopped proving your heart to someone who mistook consistency for weakness. And that broke their illusion because they didn't expect you to outgrow them quietly. They didn't expect your peace to be louder than their absence. But it is. And now, that's all they can hear. You see, when they tested your love, they thought they were protecting their heart. But what they were really protecting was their fear of being known. And you were the only one who ever truly saw them. Now, every silence feels heavier. Every night a reminder. Every thought a test. They keep failing. Not because you stopped loving them, but because they waited too long to show they still did. So if they come back one day, and they just might, remember this. They didn't return because you failed their test. They returned because they failed their own. They realized that love isn't something you measure from a distance. It's something you nurture up close. And by the time they learned that lesson, you had already graduated. They might come back, not with fireworks, not with grand apologies, but quietly, tentatively, as if nothing happened, as if the distance was just a passing storm. They'll say things like, "I've been thinking about you," or "I just wanted to see how you've been." And for a moment, you'll feel that familiar pull, that old ache, that soft spark of recognition, because a part of you still remembers how it felt when things were good, when it was easy, when you didn't have to think twice. But another part of you, the wiser one, remembers everything else too. You'll remember the waiting, the silence, the confusion, the endless overthinking. You'll remember how you had to learn to live without clarity, how you had to rebuild yourself in the spaces where they once stood. You'll remember the nights you carried conversations alone, and the mornings you told yourself you were fine. And that's when the power returns to you, not out of anger, but out of understanding. You see them now for who they are, not who you hoped they'd become. They'll want to pick up where things left off. But you've changed. Your silence wasn't a tactic, it was a transformation. You learned that real love doesn't require guessing, that genuine connection doesn't play hide and seek. That peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you protect. They may still test you, just out of habit. They may send small signals again, just to see how you'll respond. But this time, you'll recognize it. You'll see the pattern and smile quietly to yourself. Because you're no longer waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen you. They'll say you seem different, that there's something calm in your energy, something they can't quite read anymore. That's because peace is unreadable. To those who are addicted to chaos, they don't know how to interpret stillness when they've only ever known tension. And now, your peace confuses them because they can't test what doesn't react. Here's the truth. You don't have to reject them to prove you've grown. You don't have to forgive them to feel free. You can simply let them exist in your past, where they belong. Because healing isn't about proving you've moved on. It's about not needing to. You don't need to explain your peace. You don't need to announce your growth. You just live it quietly, beautifully, unapologetically. They'll feel it. They'll see that your glow didn't come from attention. It came from acceptance. That your silence wasn't a wall. It was a doorway. You didn't close it out of resentment. You closed it because peace finally knocked. And for once, you answered. They truly return. With openness, with humility, with genuine effort. You'll know it. Because it won't feel like guessing this time. It won't come with anxiety. It won't trigger that old ache. It'll feel grounded. It'll feel clear. It'll feel earned. And if it doesn't, you'll know what to do. You'll walk away with grace. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. For yourself. They used to test you, to see if you still love them. Now, you'll test the silence, to see if you still love you. And that is the real closure. Because one day, they'll finally understand what they lost. Not the texts, not the laughter, not the shared memories, but the peace you brought into their life, the softness you carried, the way you made love feel like home. And by the time they realize it, you'll already be standing somewhere new, somewhere you no longer need to prove your worth. You'll be with people who don't need to test your love because they know how to hold it. So when they come back, smile, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because their absence taught you the language of self-worth. Their silence became the sound of your awakening, and their tests led you back to yourself. That's not loss. That's evolution. And maybe, if they're lucky, they'll learn from it too. They'll learn that love can't be measured in reactions, that it's not found in guessing games, that real intimacy begins where fear ends. Maybe they'll carry that lesson into their next chapter, and maybe you'll carry yours with peace and with pride. So if you've been tested, if you've been through the silence, the pullbacks, the uncertainty, remember this. It wasn't about your worth. It was about their fear. And now that you've seen the truth, you're free. Free from their tests. Free from their timelines. Free from needing closure from people who never knew how to communicate in honesty. Because you learned. The greatest truth of all. You don't have to wait for them to come back. To move forward. You already have. If this spoke to you, take a breath and let it sink in. Then drop a comment. If you're choosing peace over confusion. And remember, the right person doesn't test your heart. They protect it.